Hello everyone, today I will continue telling you the story about a girl named LyTuDiep. That morning, Diep jolted awake from a horrifying nightmare. Her pillow was soaked through. She realized that she had been crying in her sleep, and even after waking, the tears refused to stop. The small room was filled with the pale light of early morning, yet it brought no warmth. She sat blankly in a corner, her back against the cold wall, her whole body drained of strength, shoulders trembling with stifled sobs. The weight of sorrow pressed so heavily that even breathing felt burdensome, as if every inhale carried a boulder into her chest. Her face was gaunt, the once soft lines now pulled taut with exhaustion. Her eyes were swollen red, the dark circles beneath them a testament to countless sleepless nights. Her hair was disheveled, a few damp strands of sweat clinging to her cheeks. She forced herself to stand, like an old machine that hadn't been oiled in ages, every movement heavy and stiff. The wooden door creaked open, letting in a draft of cold mist that made her shiver, but Diep stepped outside anyway, hoping the morning breeze might soothe the heaviness in her heart. Yet the moment she thought of her parents, their images surged forth, dragging with them faded memories like a worn, blurred reel of film. Her heart clenched painfully. Tears came without warning, streaming hot down her cheeks before the morning wind quickly dried them. Seconds ago, she had tried to hold it in, and now the floodgates had burst, the tears flowed uncontrollably. She cried until her eyelids puffed up, her breath breaking into uneven gasps, each small sob echoing in the stillness. She thought she should do something, anything, to distract herself from the pain. Perhaps wash her face, change her clothes, head out to the garden to pull weeds or water the plants. But just as that thought flickered, her body betrayed her. A sudden wave of dizziness struck, her legs buckled, and before she knew it, she had collapsed right in front of the gate. The entire area was silent, save for the distant quack-quack of ducks and the sporadic crowing of roosters, sounds that only deepened the sense of isolation wrapping around her. Then, an unexpected sound tore through the stillness, the ring of a phone. Diep startled, blinking several times as she tried to locate the familiar noise. When the screen lit up, two words stood out clearly: CEO James. At the sight of the name, a strange mix of emotions coursed through her: surprise, confusion, a faint warmth, and a tinge of fear. The ringtone pulsed steadily, each chime urging her on, like an invisible thread pulling her out of her daze and the dark whirlpool of thoughts. Her hand trembled as she reached out, her finger hovering just above the answer icon. In her mind, questions spun endlessly: if I answer, what will I say? If I don't, will he worry? The phone's ringtone stopped, replaced by James's deep, warm voice laced with concern. He reminded Diep in careful detail that the sun would be scorching today, and that she should stay home and rest, not push herself too hard. But Diep only gave a faint, weary smile, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. I can't just lie there. If I leave my mind empty, I'll start overthinking. I need something to do, anything, to keep myself distracted. James fell silent for a moment, then relented, telling her only to be careful and conserve her strength. The call ended, the phone screen went dark, and the house sank back into the cold, still quiet of the morning. Diep put on her conical hat and stepped out toward the fields, intending to do a bit of light work. But after only a few dozen steps, her legs faltered, her body heavy and drained. She sat by the stream, letting the cool, sunlit water slip through her fingers. For a long moment, she simply sat there in silence, until the thought of the chickens behind the house suddenly came to her. She stood up and returned to the coop. The familiar clucking echoed under the small roof. Today, the hens had laid more than usual, large, golden-shelled eggs scattered across the straw. Diep crouched down gently, gathering each one as though cradling drops of her own hard-earned labor. She carried them inside, washed away the dust, and dried each egg with a soft cloth. Then she arranged them neatly in a bamboo basket, padding it with a layer of golden rice husk to keep them from cracking. Looking at the full basket, she felt a small weight lift from her heart. By now, the sun was high. She adjusted her hat, picked up the basket, and headed to the market. The clean, sturdy eggs, carrying the faint scent of fresh straw, quickly caught the attention of buyers. They praised the rich, flavorful yolks of her eggs. The lively chatter and bargaining around her little stall seemed to pull her, if only for a moment, out of the heavy thoughts that had clouded her all morning. But as the baskets of eggs were nearly sold out, a thought began to stir within her, faint at first, like an ember beneath ash, then growing into a quiet but relentless ache. She wanted answers. She needed to confront the pain that had been gnawing at her in silence for as long as she could remember. After a moment's hesitation, she made her decision. Instead of heading straight home, she would take a detour to visit an old acquaintance, someone who had once lived near her childhood home. Maybe, just maybe, they would know something about her parents. The path to the woman's house felt longer than it used to, every step weighed down with both dread and fragile hope. When she finally arrived, she paused at the weathered wooden gate. The house looked older now, the walls patched in places, the garden overgrown with wild grass. She pushed the gate open with a soft creak, each sound sharp in the quiet afternoon air. The door opened slowly, revealing an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back into a bun. Her deep, sunken eyes studied Diep for a long moment, as if trying to connect the grown woman before her to a shadow of a child she once knew. With a voice that trembled despite her effort to steady it, Diep asked, "Auntie, do you know if my parents are still alive?" The question hung in the air, heavy and fragile. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes clouded with something unreadable. After what felt like an eternity, she gave a slow, deliberate shake of the head. "They have been gone for a long time." The words struck her like an icy blade driven deep into her chest. For a second, she could neither move nor breathe. Her fingers curled tightly into the fabric of her shirt, nails digging into her palm. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts. She forced herself to nod faintly, swallowing the knot rising in her throat, willing the tears not to fall. She murmured a thank you, turned to leave, and reached for the door. But then, in a voice low and hoarse, almost as if confessing a sin, the old woman spoke again. "The truth is, your parents are still alive. But they were cruel, heartless people. They abandoned you when you were just a newborn. I thought it kinder to let you believe they had died, rather than see you return to such merciless hands." Diep froze. Her heart pounded so violently she could feel it in her throat. The world seemed to fall silent around her, no birdsong, no rustle of leaves, only the faint whistle of wind slipping between the cracks of the old house. She turned slowly, but the woman's eyes had already shifted away, fixed on some invisible point in the past. Without another word, Diep stepped outside. The air was heavier now, thick with the weight of the revelation. Each step away from that house felt both freeing and crushing, the truth cutting deeper than the lie ever had. By the time she reached the edge of the village, the sky had darkened. The wind had picked up, whipping the tree branches into a restless dance. Thick, heavy clouds rolled across the horizon, swallowing the last golden light of the day. A storm was on its way. The familiar dirt path home was slick and treacherous, the earth damp from earlier rain. Each step felt slower, heavier, as if she were dragging behind her the weight of all the unanswered questions she still carried. The wind lashed against her face, tossing her hair into a tangled mess. In the distance, thunder rumbled, low, long, and ominous. With each echo, her chest tightened, unsure if it was from the fresh wound inside her or the aching loneliness of walking alone through a world that suddenly felt so much colder. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and kept moving, her shadow stretching and trembling beneath the flickering light of the first street lamp she passed. Somewhere behind her, the wind howled through the trees like a voice calling out, a voice she could not, or dared not, answer. She could barely drag herself to the gate, each step feeling as if someone were pressing her down into the earth. Her breathing came in short, hot bursts, yet was caught tight in her chest, her entire body so weak that one more strong gust of wind might have knocked her over. Before she could touch the familiar wooden door, darkened and worn from years of rain and sun, her legs gave way, the last of her strength draining away. Diep collapsed onto the cold, damp ground, her feeble hands unable to hold her up, her face pressing into the earthy, musty scent of the soil. Her eyes shut tight, her breath so faint it came only as thin wisps of vapor in the chilly air. Her consciousness faded, and all sounds grew distant, the wind whistling over the corrugated roof, the wet leaves brushing against each other. Everything seemed to echo from somewhere far, far away. The sky darkened abruptly, heavy black clouds roiling together before the rain poured down, fast and furious. The icy drops lashed against her face, streamed down her cheeks, seeped into her hair, and soaked through the thin fabric of her clothes, leaving her drenched. The rain showed no mercy, as if trying to wash away the last trace of warmth in her fragile body, as if testing the endurance of the lone, helpless figure lying there. No one passed by. Only the drumming of the rain blended with the startled clucks of chickens and the quacking of ducks from afar, weaving an ominous symphony of the countryside in a storm. Occasionally, a flash of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the exploding raindrops midair, followed by thunder that crashed down like a cold warning. It was impossible to tell how much time had passed, the curtain of rain still blurring everything in sight, when a familiar figure appeared at the gate. James, his dark coat soaked through, raindrops streaming down the bridge of his nose before splattering onto the ground, had just stepped out of his car. "Diep," he called out loudly. No answer. He called again, urgency tightening his voice, then froze. His heart clenched painfully as his eyes fell upon her motionless body lying at the gate, her hair matted with rain, her face pale and lifeless. "Diep. My God," James almost shouted, rushing to kneel beside her. His hand trembled as it touched her cold body. Without a moment's hesitation, he scooped her into his arms, feeling the chill seep through every layer of clothing into his own skin. He ran toward the door, shoving it open with his shoulder, and carried her inside. Laying her gently on the bed, he moved with painstaking care, as though any small mistake might cause her more harm. He quickly fetched a dry towel, wiping the rain from her face and hair. He replaced her cold, wet clothes with something warm and soft, then wrapped her tightly in a blanket, trying to trap every last bit of heat. When he was done, James sat close beside her, his gaze fixed on her pallid face. Worry etched every line of his features, and he knew that if he hadn't arrived in time, the outcome might have been something he couldn't bear to imagine. Diep remained unconscious, her breathing shallow and fragile, as if it could vanish at any moment. James clasped her small hand in his larger palm enveloping hers, as if willing warmth and strength into her, pulling her back to him. Outside, the rain continued to pound relentlessly, each drop striking the roof in a rapid, steady rhythm. But inside this room, for James, the entire world had narrowed down to the fragile rise and fall of the woman's breath, and the silent prayer in his heart that she would wake. The young woman lay there, unmoving, like a leaf torn from its branch and cast onto the cold, wet ground by the wind. Diep's pale face bore the marks of exhaustion, her lips parched, her breath so fragile that without leaning close, one might think it had already slipped away. Outside, the rain poured without pause, cold gusts whipping against the wooden walls with a shrill cry, carrying dampness and the earthy scent into every corner of the house. The rain's relentless drumming seemed determined to drown everything in a blanket of gray despair. Even time itself felt slower, leaving only the pounding of James's heart echoing in his chest. He sat at the edge of the bed, holding Diep's small, icy hand tightly. Every faint twitch of her fingers made him squeeze a little more, as though afraid she might slip away from his grasp. In his mind, the story of her parents replayed over and over, reopening a wound that had never truly healed. More than once, he had wanted to tell her the truth, to let her know everything, but each time, he stopped himself. He feared that moment would be the final blow to her heart, already scarred beyond measure. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering against the tin roof. The dirt road leading to the highway had already turned into a treacherous mire, making it impossible to get Diep to a hospital now. All James could do was sit there, holding her hand as if to pass his own warmth into her, clinging to the fragile reassurance that she was still here. He prayed silently, for the night to pass quickly, for the rain to ease, and most of all, for those weary eyes to open and look at him again. Through the long night, James never once left her side. Each time the wind howled through the door cracks, he would rise to adjust her blanket, tucking it higher around her neck. His eyes burned with fatigue, but every time he looked at her face, some invisible force anchored him there. When the faint, pale light of dawn finally filtered through the thin curtain of rain, James realized he had been awake all night. Without delay, he went to the kitchen, lit the old charcoal stove, and cooked a pot of plain rice porridge. The gentle aroma of fresh rice mingled with the steam, filling the damp house with a rare touch of warmth on such a cold morning. Once it was ready, James quickly called for a doctor. The muddy road and heavy rain made travel difficult, so it took a long while before the doctor finally arrived. James paced restlessly, glancing at the door again and again, his heart pounding like a war drum. Each passing minute felt like an hour, the ticking of the clock only fueling his anxiety. At last, the door opened, and the doctor entered with a grave expression. "She has a very high fever," the doctor said. "Her body is exhausted, her immune system nearly depleted." He paused, drawing a deep breath before adding, "There is something even more concerning. Her eyes are swollen and bloodshot, and with such a high fever, the risk of vision loss is extremely high." James froze. His ears rang, and his heart felt as if it were being crushed. He asked again and again, searching for even the smallest glimmer of hope, but the doctor only shook his head. He suspected that Diep had cried too much, causing severe damage to the blood vessels and nerves around her eyes. Before leaving, the doctor handed over a prescription and warned, "If there's no improvement, you must take her to the hospital immediately. Do not delay." James immediately called his mother, his voice urgent, asking her to buy the medicine and bring it at once. When he hung up, he returned to the bed and sat down quietly. His eyes lingered on the small, unconscious figure before him for a long time. A deep, aching sorrow welled up inside him. This young woman had endured too much loss already, and he silently vowed that he would not let fate take anything more from her. James's mother went to buy the medicine, stopping by a roadside fruit shop on the way. She carefully chose plump, crimson-red apples, clusters of glossy purple grapes, and a few golden oranges that gave off a gentle fragrance. "She needs nourishment to recover," she murmured to herself, her hand also picking out several juicy pears. She knew that a body recovering from a severe illness needed not only medicine, but also wholesome sweetness to regain its strength. When she reached Diep's gate, she paused for a moment. The yard was still slick with rainwater from the night before, not yet dry, and the morning wind whispered sadly through the row of areca palms. She knocked gently, but without waiting for James to answer, she pushed the door open and called softly. "My daughter-in-law." "Ah, no, where's the young lady?" James was sitting by the bed, his body leaning slightly forward, eyes fixed on Diep's face. When he looked up, she could clearly see the fatigue etched into his features, yet there was still a flicker of something patient and steadfast in his gaze. He told his mother everything, from the moment he found Diep collapsed outside the gate in the pouring rain, to carrying her inside, changing her out of the cold, soaked clothes, and staying up all night to watch over her. Placing the bag of fruit on the table, she stepped closer to the bed. Her warm palm touched Diep's forehead, and she frowned slightly at the lingering heat. "She's still not awake?" she asked, her voice heavy with concern. The two of them tried to give Diep her medicine. James gently tilted her head and used a small spoon to feed her sips of water so the pills would slide down her throat. Looking at her pale face, closed lashes, and faint breathing, they both knew she was more exhausted than ever. Resting a hand firmly on her son's shoulder, she said with quiet resolve, "Stay here with her. I have to get back to tend to the house, but this girl needs someone by her side right now." After his mother left, the house fell into a stillness broken only by the ticking of the clock and Diep's faint breathing. James stood up, letting his eyes wander around the space. Everything felt familiar, yet he noticed corners of the kitchen and yard covered with a thin film of dust, a few household items left unattended as if no one had had the time to tidy them. He stepped out to the chicken coop, carrying a ripe bunch of bananas his mother had left. Peeling each one, he tore the fruit into bite-sized pieces for the hens. Their clucking filled the yard, drawing a few ducks from the far end of the pond to waddle closer. James bent down, sprinkling extra grain into the trough before fetching a bucket of clean water to fill it. Spotting that the water dish was tilted, he adjusted it so it wouldn't spill over. Once the animals were fed, James gathered Diep's clothes along with the ones he had worn the day before, taking them to an old aluminum basin. He gave them a quick rinse, then filled the basin with water and added a few scoops of detergent. Hands once used to tapping at keyboards and sorting paperwork were now submerged in warm, soapy water. The sound of fabric being scrubbed swished through the air, white suds rising as a gentle scent spread in the breeze. He wrung each garment and hung them neatly on a bamboo rack to dry in the soft sunlight. Passing through the kitchen, James noticed a few bowls still bearing traces of dried rice from the previous day. He turned on the tap, washed each one clean, and set them neatly on the rack. He wiped the table, rearranged the spice jars, and brought a sense of warmth back into the kitchen. From time to time, he paused to check on Diep. Every time her forehead felt a little cooler, his heart eased. He would pull the blanket higher, resting his hand on her small palm, just to be sure she was still there. By mid-afternoon, James swept the front yard, gathering fallen leaves scattered along the walkway, and cleared the veranda. The black dog lying in the corner lifted its head to watch him, as if realizing there was a temporary master in the house today. He smiled, patting its head before returning to his chores. When the doctor returned with news that Diep's fever had gone down, James felt such relief that he could only lean down and place a soft kiss on her forehead. It wasn't to wake her, it was to say, "You're safe now." Then he went back to finish his work, rinsing the fruit his mother had brought, peeling it so Diep could eat as soon as she woke, and checking that all the windows and gates were secure before nightfall. Everything was taken care of so thoroughly that if someone had walked in, they would have thought this wasn't just a guest staying over, but the true owner of the home, a man intent on keeping it warm and safe, so that when Diep opened her eyes, she would feel as though the storms of the past days had never touched her. That evening, James's mother returned, carrying a lunchbox still steaming with heat. The aroma of braised pork, boiled greens, and hot soup drifted in with the light breeze, filling the small room. She stepped inside, carefully placing the lunchbox on the table before moving to the bed where Diep still lay motionless. Her hand rested gently on Diep's forehead, then moved down to her wrist to check her pulse. A faint look of relief appeared on her face when she felt the girl's temperature was nearly back to normal and her heartbeat steadier. Still, her body remained limp, her muscles devoid of strength, and her eyes stayed shut, showing she would need more time to recover. Turning to her son, her voice was gentle but firm. "Eat. You need strength if you want to take care of someone else. If you keep skipping meals and end up sick, who's going to look after this girl?" James hesitated, his eyes fixed on Diep. But under his mother's steady gaze, he finally took the lunchbox and began eating slowly. With every bite, his eyes drifted back toward the bed, as if afraid that even a few seconds of distraction might mean she would need him. When he finished, the two of them sat together at the small table by the window. Outside, the rain had eased, leaving only a few droplets clinging to the leaves, occasionally falling onto the tin roof with a soft, steady tack, tack. In that quiet space, James took a deep breath and began telling his mother what he knew about Diep's parents, a story he had kept to himself for so long, fearing it would only hurt her more. His voice grew lower when he reached the painful details, while his mother's eyes quietly followed each word. She placed her hand over his, a gesture of support and understanding. They talked for a long time, weighing the possibilities of bringing the two families together to resolve the misunderstandings that had dragged on for years. When James finally stopped, his mother stayed silent for a moment before offering a gentle smile, a smile of someone seasoned by life, warm yet deep. "I know you care for her deeply. If the two of you end up together, I'll be happy. That girl, she's been through too much. You could be the safe harbor she needs." The atmosphere in the room seemed warmer, as if her words had lit a small lamp in the night. After a while, she stood up and reminded him softly. "Take good care of her. Call me right away if anything happens." Her figure slowly disappeared behind the closing door, leaving James in the room bathed in the glow of a lone yellow light. He moved back to the bed, pulled his chair closer, and wrapped his large, warm hand around Diep's small, cold one. He could feel the faint warmth through her skin, hear her weak yet steady breathing. Outside, the night had fully descended. The wind rattled softly against the window frame, blending with the faint chirp of insects somewhere in the garden. James sat there, his eyes never leaving Diep's face, holding on to a single wish, that when the first rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks at dawn, her eyes would open, and she would see him there, knowing that from the very beginning, she had never been alone.
Hello mọi người, lại là mình đây. Chúc mọi người một ngày thật vui vẻ và hạnh phúc. Cảm ơn mọi người rất là nhiều vì mọi người đã theo dõi video hôm nay, cũng như đã ủng hộ cho kênh mình trong những video vừa qua. Mình hy vọng rằng trong những video tiếp theo của kênh mình sẽ tiếp tục nhận được sự ủng hộ và yêu mến của mọi người. Và hơn hết là cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều vì đã luôn ủng hộ cho những video của mình mới ra. Tất cả các nội dung trên kênh của mình đều xoay quanh những nhân vật có thật và vô cùng cực khổ. Mọi người cũng có thể để lại bình luận, cũng như có thể dành những yêu thương và những lời tốt đẹp đến với những nhân vật. Và mọi người ơi, nếu như mọi người yêu quý kênh của mình, cũng như là có một cách để mọi người không bỏ lỡ bất kỳ video nào để có thể đón xem những diễn biến mới nhất của câu chuyện, thì mọi người có thể like và đăng ký kênh. Ngoài ra thì mọi người cũng có thể chia sẻ video này đến những người khác để mọi người cũng có thể xem được video này nhé. Và chào tạm biệt mọi người, hẹn gặp lại trong những video tiếp theo.